We are, it would seem, more than halfway through 2026. We are well into summer now, approaching first harvest, August 1st. We've made it past the sesquicentennial, the nation's 250th anniversary, and coming up on what we call the midterm elections. How are we feeling? I have been watching the news over the past year and a half in moderation and finding plenty there that flies in the face of my UU values and principles. I have been thinking a lot these days about how I am choosing to respond to the events during this challenging time. I have in that time found myself repeatedly on a street corner with some dear friends, attending a demonstration, sign in hand. This after a 8 years long hiatus where I felt pretty certain those days were behind me. My knees not being as strong as they once were, I take a chair with me these days. But I go and stick it out and find some joy there. Whereas in the last days of 2024, I was often feeling fearful, and I still find myself frightened by much of what I see and read. In the past year and a half, I have found in myself something new, fresh, ready, even eager to meet this moment. Now, I am not here this morning to tell you how to find this same thing in yourself because A, I don't know exactly where it came from, and B, I have no idea what your life is like or what you are called to, and C, I don't pretend to know whether the right place for all of us right now is street activism. There are many, many ways to make a positive difference in the world, and I think we need them all. Indeed, I think the reason I'm here mostly is to share the question: how might each of us understand how we are to respond in this moment? And some thoughts about some different ways we might do that work, what the 19th century might have called reform, or as 21st century folks might now call it, justice making. Having spent a good many of my years as an academic studying the Transcendentalists, I found myself thinking a good deal in recent days about what some historians have called the divergence in that 19th century movement. Some of you likely know, though many may not, that Transcendentalism was a movement in American literature, philosophy, and religion that arose from our Unitarian and Universalist faiths, mostly credited to the former, arising mostly from intellectual circles within and adjacent to the Harvard Divinity School. I think you know this better than most congregations because your founder was a Transcendentalist. Most historians date the impetus of the movement to Ralph Waldo Emerson's American Scholar address to the Phi Beta Kappa Society at Harvard in 1837, in which he called for a new American literature shaped by the American experience, followed the next year by Emerson's address to the Harvard Divinity School graduating class, wherein he called for a new American religion, also shaped by direct experience, in this case by each person's direct experience of God. Emerson argued that each of us carries in us the same capacity reported by the ancients of the Bible to hear and know and understand God for ourselves, and not merely as reported by others in Scripture, interpreted to us by clergy. These addresses followed closely on the heels of Emerson's book-length essay, Nature, published in 1836, in which he described God's presence everywhere, in everything, inherent, immanent, making it accessible to us in every moment, but especially in quiet moments of solitude surrounded by nature and, importantly, separated from the demands of society. Said Emerson, "In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. The name of the nearest friend sounds then foreign and accidental. To be brothers, to be acquaintances, master or servant, is then a trifle and a disturbance. I am the lover of uncontained and immortal beauty. In the wilderness, I find something more dear and connate than in the streets or in the villages. Clearly, for Emerson, one of the benefits of nature is the opportunity it offers to leave society behind, at least for a time. For historian Philip F. Gora, this feature of Emerson's thinking, his idea of divine connection with God through nature, separate and apart from his neighbors, places Emerson not only at the beginning of Transcendentalism, but at one side of a divide within the movement that will grow from this moment, a division between individual reform and social reform. For those of us who attended Reverend Allen's adult RE series on Transcendentalism, this should be a familiar idea. There are many figures in the movement that Gora, in his history, American Transcendentalism, places on one side or the other of this divide. Given our time limitations this morning, I'll consider just Emerson and two others of the many figures Gora considers. On the other side of this individual versus social divide, Gora places abolitionist Theodore Parker. And though they were friends and close in age, there are important contrasts between these men. Emerson importantly leaves the Unitarian ministry, citing his inability to faithfully administer communion, ultimately becoming more speaker than preacher. Parker remains in the pulpit to preach social reform, and his first engagement with social reform is to bring transcendentalism, little by little, into Unitarian pulpits. This is the first controversy he has to weather in order to keep preaching in Unitarian pulpits, and it's a doozy. He then begins to advocate for many kinds of reform. His biographer, John White Chadwick, notes that Parker was involved with almost all of the reform movements of the time: peace, temperance, education, the condition of women, penal legislation, prison discipline, the moral and mental destitution of the rich, and the physical destitution of the poor. Residing and preaching in the Boston suburb of West Roxbury, he was a neighbor to the Brook Farm Utopian Reform Community and a frequent visitor there. But above all of these reforms near to his heart, Parker concerned himself with the abolition of slavery, beginning in the 1840s and lasting all the way to his death in 1860. He led the effort in Boston to combat the Fugitive Slave Act. He helped from the Vigilance Committee in Boston that refused, he helped form the Vigilance Committee in Boston that refused to comply with the law and helped to hide runaways. He welcomed William and Ellen Craft into his home and his congregation in Boston, following their courageous escape from slavery in Georgia, and then helped them on their way to England beyond the reach of the slave catchers. And he was one of the Secret Six who supported John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. He was a thoroughgoing and very public social reformer, so it's easy to see why Gora positions him over here. Situated between them, I would say, Gora positions Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau was, like his original mentor, Emerson, a very private person who knew a direct experience of God in nature, away from the noise of the marketplace. Also, like Emerson, Thoreau occasionally emerged from solitude to make his private experience public through his published writing and in the Lyceum and other public forums where he spoke. Many of his most beautiful writings, in his journal, in his essays, and in two of his book-length works, are about his private sojourns in nature. But he also has an important collection of essays concerning social reform, especially of anti-slavery reform, including slavery in Massachusetts his 3 essays in defense of John Brown, and his best-known essay, Resistance to Civil Government, which was later called Civil Disobedience. All of these essays were first public speeches, then published essays. But in the last case, the work started as a public stand. That is, Thoreau's refusal to pay his poll tax in order to manifest his opposition to the Mexican-American War, and the resulting night he spent in jail. While his stand is public, though, it is taken individually. As Thoreau makes clear here and elsewhere, for him, social reform must begin with individual self-reform. The corruption of social institutions, problems of government, of education, of the family are, for Thoreau, rooted in individuals. Though Thoreau here is, in the experience and publication of Civil Disobedience, an advocate of social action, he means action by one self-reformed person at a time. This is important to our understanding Thoreau's later influence on activists like Gandhi and King. They took his ideas about individual civil disobedience and put them to work on a broader scale through organized collective action. So at this point, in my understanding, I'm suggesting a revision of Gora's model, less a division between self-reform and social reform, and more a continuum, with Emerson at my right hand, Parker at my left, and Thoreau roughly at my chinny-chin-chin. But what Thoreau and Emerson never tell us, of course, is that their speaking out on the subject of slavery or other reform topics is not entirely a matter of their own individual reform. Wait, what? Could this be true? Could they have had other influences outside their private shells of self-reflection? In her wonderful history of the anti-slavery movement in Concord, Massachusetts, the historic Boston suburb where Emerson and Thoreau lived, Sandy Petrolinas details the early, deep, and long-time commitment of the women of the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society, formed in the 1830s, with a senator's wife and slave owner's daughter, Mary Merrick Brooks, at the helm, and the mothers, aunts, and daughters of Emerson's and Thoreau's family, among many others, deeply involved. The organization formed at a time when women were learning in earnest how to educate themselves and give expression to their true minds and feelings privately with one another, but also at a time when the cost of a woman's public expression of her opinions might be truly irreparable. So much so that women very rarely undertook public speaking, lest they be publicly shamed as fallen or unsexed. I can imagine, maybe you can too, that as spoken and written conversations concerning reform of all kinds became more and more available to women, how it might become more and more frustrating not to hear one's own perspective represented in the public forum, and how one might lean on a nephew, son, or brother who had a platform to give voice to what you yourself could not say. This is precisely what happened in Concord in the 25 years leading up to the Civil War. Brooks, along with Emerson's Aunt Mary, wife Lydian, and daughter Ellen, and Thoreau's mother Cynthia, and sisters Helen and Sophia, and the women of the Alcott family, were daily lobbyists on behalf of enslaved people with their beloved men of the podium, overcoming their reluctance to speak as reformers again and again, and ultimately winning them over to abolitionism and the cause of emancipation. In considering then Gora's idea of a division among transcendentalists concerning personal versus social reform, we might need now to add some points on the continuum. Maybe Emerson and personal reform and Parker in institutional form, maybe between them we might include interpersonal reform through the dialogue of two or more people, perhaps also reform within a family, perhaps also communal reform, like that which might happen within a society or a congregation. Maybe even beyond institutional reform, we might find cultural, national, even global reform. It occurs to me that this model might be more than a continuum. It might be a cycle, endlessly repeating, or even a mandala, an interconnected network where reform might start at any point on it and be connected with some other level of reform. Maybe we might even see this whole circle filled to its edges with opportunities to make change. Opportunities we might take starting at any point within it and moving toward any other point. Oh my goodness, I seem to hear you thinking, she's really got off the deep end here. But seriously, why bring all of this for you to consider on a Sunday morning, maybe even before you've had your coffee? Maybe it has to do something with you, or maybe even with my own experience. What do these transcendentalists at nearly 200 years distance from our historical moment have to do with us? Well, I'm of the opinion that they actually have quite a lot to do with us. That Emerson, who left the Unitarian ministry, and Thoreau, who left the Unitarian Church altogether, and Parker, who stayed and worked to bring Unitarianism and Transcendentalism together, that they are all forebears of our current faith movement, for better and worse. That our current social movements are to a greater or lesser extent the direct inheritors of their social movements. That their insights of long ago directly inform our own insights, and that their blind spots are all too frequently nearly identical to our own blind spots. And the idea that I most want to bring to the fore today, with regard to individual versus social reform, is maybe it's not either or. Maybe it's not a matter of either work on myself or intervene in the world. Maybe it's not a matter of first one and then the other. Maybe it's not a divide or a continuum or even a cycle. Maybe instead it's an interconnected field of choices. And where we choose to begin has largely to do with what experiences, tools, and resources and networks we have at our disposal. I'm not a veteran, but I'm concerned about veterans, so I might ask, who's a veteran friend I might reach out to check in with them, just to listen? And what news articles might they suggest to me to help me understand what they are facing? If I'm not the parent or relation of a trans youth that I know of, but I'm concerned about what trans and non-binary youth are facing right now, whose Facebook or Blue Sky feed might I follow to learn more? And what book or podcast might that feed point me to? If I'm a legal aid worker overwhelmed with the number of immigrants on my docket, who might I reach out to for support for me and my work, even among people who don't know as much about the law as I do? How might they help connect me to resources? And for all of us who feel overwhelmed just now and find ourselves in congregational life, how might we set up times and spaces where we might just lean into one another, not to hand over our burdens, but to speak out loud our experience to one another? And how might we together use this pulpit to give voice to our concerns, or to the concerns of others even more overwhelmed than we are? I have been thinking about all of this, and from what I can tell, many of you here at UUSG have been thinking about it too. I noticed last year, during one of my early instances standing on the street corner holding my sign, that every stripe of issue was represented around me. I thought to myself, good. That's very, very good. Because in this particular moment, we are going to need everyone we can get, as there is an awful lot to do. I heard there were over 700 of us on that corner that day. And what I noticed most was how many more of us there were, smiling, waving, honking horns, driving by us. I wondered, for the duration of our 2 hours at the curb, where are they headed? Maybe they're taking their child to dance class or art class or therapy. Maybe they're taking their mom to the Veterans Affairs office. Maybe they're headed to the food pantry or to see their immigration attorney. Maybe they can't be out here with us this week. Maybe this sort of street action will just never be their thing. But I pray for them and for all of us that we will do the million, billion little things that need doing to make change in this moment. And that our being here on the street corner will give them some courage or support or inspiration. I won't deny it. For many years, and maybe even still today, Theodore Parker has been the Unitarian I wish I was, and also mostly the Unitarian I know I'm not. And maybe also a little bit the Unitarian I am. Maybe even still after all these years. And I try to remember that for all those years that Parker led the way in social justice in Boston, Emerson was his beloved friend. That it was Emerson's idea that we could know the divine ourselves directly that led Parker to his calling, to his most important and admirable work in this world, and to all the reform, inward and outward, that this entailed. Let it be so for me, and I pray for all of us. May we become the ones we have been waiting for in every way we are called to be. May it be so. May we make it so.
Visit us at UUSG.org.